我藐视现在的国会，
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 我藐视现在的国会。
没有讨论，
没有讨论，
没有民主，
没有民主。
On Tuesday, May 21st, tens of thousands of people gathered outside the legislature in Taipei to call for more transparency regarding a controversial legislative reform bill. At the same time of the protest, lawmakers in the legislature had completed the second reading of some of the amendments in the bill. If the bill is passed, the amendments will fine government officials who refuse to answer lawmakers' questions during interpellation sessions or who gives false answers. Government personnel can also be held criminally liable or face impeachment for engaging in such actions. The amendments also require lawmakers to vote by open ballot, instead of the current secret ballots on nominations for key government positions, as well as fine nominated candidates who give false statements or hide information when answering questions or being vetted by lawmakers. The protesters, including 20 civil organizations, voiced concern over alleged procedural issues and demanded that the bills, developed jointly by the opposition KMT and Taiwan People's Party, or TPP, be subject to a committee review to ensure due process is followed. To fully grasp the issue, I contacted the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, the opposition, and the Parliamentary Majority Party, the KMT, asking them to present their perspectives on the bill. My name is Iris Xu. You're listening to The Divide.
Well, you say reform, but in Chinese, what we've been calling is 扩权, which is an expansion of authority, and this is precisely what it does. My name is Vincent Chao. I'm currently a Taipei City Councilor, and I was the former Director of International Affairs at the Democratic Progressive Party.
Here's Vincent Chao on why the bill proposed by the TPP and the KMT is so controversial.
Well, you say reform, but in Chinese, what we've been calling is 扩权, which is an expansion of authority, and this is precisely what it does. I mean, this bill that has been put forward is very controversial for a number of reasons. The first one is it broadens the scope of the legislature's powers in an unprecedented way. Not only will the legislature have the ability to fine and to potentially jail government officials during the course of hearings on narratives that they deem to be unclear or untrue, they will actually be able to fine or jail government officials simply for talking back during the course of legislative hearings. I mean, that's unprecedented. We don't see this in any democracy in the world. And, the key part of any law is clarity, right? Up until today, nobody has really any clarity what it means to be talking back. So this idea that they've put forward in Chinese is called 反咨询. 反咨询 means sort of like anti-questioning. So the point is that, if you're in a legislative hearing, you can't have anti-questions. But again, what are anti-questions? So for example, if somebody asks me, what do you feel about this specific proposal? And I say, what proposal are you talking about? Is that an anti-question? Like, is there potential to be jailed or fined in that case? So there's just a lot of, I would say, a lot of overreach and a lot of unclarity when it comes to this bill. But aside from that, I think what's driving most of the people out on the streets isn't just the effects against government officials, which would certainly make it difficult for the executive branch to function, but also the expansion of investigatory powers by the legislature. And this is weird for two reasons. The first one is we already have an investigatory organ called the Control Yuan. And for many people who come from the United States, they're used to a three-way separation of power between the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and executive branch. In Taiwan, we have a five-way separation of powers. Under the Constitution, we have the addition of the Control Yuan, which is supposed to be the government's investigatory watchdog as well as the examination yuan, which controls the hire of civil servants. So this is not only a usurpation of the control yuan's power, it's also vastly broadening the legislative investigatory prerogative to the degree where they can call upon any organization, any military body, as they say, any government organization, and compel them to give information at any time without any of the checks and balances that are inherent in other organizations. So I say checks and balances for this reason.
According to Chao, this is an expansion of power for the legislative branch.
In the US, although they have a different system of government, they have a presidential system, whereas we have a semi-presidential system. For them, strong legislative investigatory powers are necessary because their executive branch doesn't report to the legislative branch. In our system, our executive branch does. But with all of that aside, what our system will do if this proposal by the KMT passes is they have access to any court proceedings, even if they're in progress. They have access to any classified material without the corresponding legal framework to ensure matters of classified matters are handled appropriately. They can go into personal affairs, including potential conflicts of interest. And there's a vast history of them doing so. I mean, even just recently. I mean, just let's see, this month, I mean, a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee from the KMT side has been sued for our Ministry of Foreign Affairs for leaking classified documents. KMT legislator Ma Wen-jun is under investigation for potentially sending classified material over to Korea, the government of Korea, on our top secret submarine program. And I guess the holistic theory is that this isn't being done in a responsible way that says that I'm doing this because I truly feel that our congressional powers need to overhaul. They're doing this because the opposition's doing this because they failed to win the presidency. And as a result, they want to broaden their legislative powers, and they did win the legislature together at the expense of the executive branch, the control yuan, as well as the judiciary. And I guess the broad fear is that if they succeed, then what's next? So that's driving a lot of people onto the streets today, and I think these are some of the factors that are driving controversy behind these proposed reforms.
I see. And some say that in the U.S., the Congress has the power to hold the White House in contempt. And at first glance, the bill seemed to be doing the same, giving more supervision power to the parliament. Some say, what's wrong with that?
Well, two things. The first one is, as you can see, including the case of Peter Navarro right now, the former National Economic Council head director, like the U.S. contempt of Congress charges normally apply in two cases. The first one is failing to abide by subpoena. So if Congress compels testimony and you refuse to go, then that's one quick way to land yourself with contempt charges, as Peter Navarro found out. And the second was kind of line in the course of judicial proceedings, and particularly proceedings that are at heart, related to either criminal or civil charges. And we see very few exceptions to this. And I certainly haven't seen an example where, for example, Congress holds the White House in contempt. That's happened in the UK when at one point the UK Parliament had held the entire, I think, cabinet in contempt because they refused to provide materials at one point. But that has not applied in the US case. But my point is this. If you want to make direct comparisons with the United States, it's difficult for a number of reasons. The first one is that, again, we're completely different political systems here. I mean, Taiwan is a semi-presidential system. We're not a parliamentary system like the UK. Neither are we a presidential system like the US. And that's an important distinction because in the US's case, I mean, these powers are necessary for the legislative branch to compel testimony from the executive branch, which would not otherwise have to report to Congress. In our case, our executive branch is appointed by the president, but nevertheless is accountable to Congress. The UK side is obviously vastly different as the parliamentary procedures go. But I mean, aside from that, I think the comparisons become difficult because you have to also take into account the hundreds of years of constitutional precedent we see in both the UK and the US. And that's related to how members of Congress should use their authority and powers effectively, but also responsibly. And we simply don't have a history of that here in Taiwan. In fact, we have KMT legislators going on the record just recently saying that the relationship between the congressional executive branch was a top-bottom relationship. And then we have the caucus whip, Fu Kunqi from the KMT, saying, oh, the purpose of these reforms are to ensure that the DPP can't find cabinet officials. I mean, it's ridiculous, frankly, what their objectives are. But the third part is this, is that as we look at these comparisons, they also become flawed because we don't have the appropriate checks and balances in place for our legislature. Again, we have long histories of members of the LY leaking government documents up. We have long histories of members of the LY using formal congressional time and meetings in matters of self-interest related to cases that are particular to them personally. We have long histories of, for example, avoidance of personal benefits in terms of interest cases that are also, I think, necessary to keep in mind. So, I mean, all taken together, these reforms are something that evidently the Taiwanese people feel are problematic and are willing to stand in the streets for. You know, I think it goes back again to the idea that they're just not something that people, these powers aren't something that people necessarily trust our members of the LI with.
I see. And you talked about the protest yesterday, and the KMT party chair, Eric Chu, today says that the protest on Tuesday was an attempt by the DPP to overpower the majority with a minority, to replace counting heads with fists, and to suppress the legislature with street power. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, it's a bit rich, given that one of their legislators, Xu Chaoxing, literally admitted on a live stream on her Facebook that she had purposefully reached out to trip and to ensure that one of the DPP legislators fell onto the ground during the course of proceedings because she didn't like her. I mean, this is the example. I mean, I'll put it this way. Nobody wanted to see the clashes that took place in Parliament on, I think it was the 18th. Nobody wanted to see that. But it became a procedural issue. And I think the clash became a way to ensure that these procedural issues were followed. Because what we saw over the past few weeks of this discussion was that procedural matters were not followed, or that procedural matters were done in a way that were insufficiently open, public, and accountable. So, for example, what we saw in the course of these discussions was that every time people had demanded a substantive review of individual articles that had been proposed, they would say, let's refer this over to committee. Over a committee, they would say, let's refer this over to the the legislature as a whole. And then when it came under discussion, legislature as a whole, they said, well, let's vote on it. And then it passes because of this majority. But then where's the substantial review, particularly of all these matters I think that people would have valid concerns over? So again, you know, people respect democracy. Democracy means that if the KMT and the DPP were very insistent on doing this thing, they would probably get it their way. But at the very least, I think the people of Taiwan are right to demand not only substantive review, but also understanding of what this bill will entail, not only for, you know, government, but also for individual rights, particularly if they were expanded to a degree where anybody, anywhere could be held to the parliament to ask, to have to answer any question. That, you know, testimony, again, would be bereft of sort of judicial protections that would be afforded if it was done by the courts.
As of Thursday, May 23rd, the opposition KMT party has not yet responded to my invitation to appear on the program. However, they held a press conference today, stating that their stance reflects the majority public opinion.
I believe that everyone is clear about the result of 2024 presidential and legislative election, that the opposition hold the majority in legislative PM, and the DPP hold double minority in both executive and legislative power. The KMT promote the parliamentary reform to take on the expectation of majority of public opinion to strengthen the legislative yuan's power of overseeing the ruling government and the check and balance. What we have seen in the legislative yuan over the past week is the 100% domestic political process in Taiwan.
And here's Vincent Chao.
I don't think anybody has really done a poll to say, I mean, to say whether the majority supported this or not. I'll put it this way. I was a spokesperson during the presidential campaign for Lai Ching-te, who's now the president. And it was a really tough campaign because I think the opposition parties ran on a slew of issues that really resonated with the public, which included, for example, Taiwan's high housing prices, which include the stubborn low salaries that have not, increased realistically for years, which include sort of the difficulties that we're having with the energy transition and so forth. And I think if he asked the majority of polling during the campaign, and we did multiple times, these would be the issues that the majority of the people care about. I don't think I've seen any poll to suggest that the first thing they wanted a new legislative branch to tackle would be broadening their own powers and authority, particularly in an accountable way. I don't think you can find any single poll to suggest that. So what's unfortunate is that this is taking valuable time and effort away from the issues that really need to be discussed in a bipartisan way, which is how to self-housing. How do you find new models of economic development that are going to grow salaries, particularly in the middle class? How are you going to deal with broadening the energy transition when both major parties, have committed to being carbon-free in the next 4 decades? So, I mean, there are very valid questions here that should be discussed, but unfortunately, and again, I don't think anybody signed up for this, but unfortunately, you know, every everybody's just focused on this legislative overreach, and we're seeing fistfights as a result of it, and it's unfortunate.
And finally, I asked Vincent about how he feels about tens of thousands of protesters took to the street to protest the bill, and whether he sees the protest as a show of support for the ruling DPP party.
I mean, I'll put it this way. The people that showed up on the streets yesterday, and I think will show up again on Friday, are not people that form the traditional matrix of DPP supporters. I mean, if you go on the streets, as I was, you'll see probably 80% of them are young people. A lot of them were students. There weren't that many people that would these aren't the same kind of overlap of people that would show up in DPP party events. My point being is that this is a group of people that are not motivated by party politics, but they're motivated by the very real fears that this legislative overreach would have on their individual freedoms and responsibilities, and what it would mean for government efficiency, and what it would do for Taiwan's international standing. And so this is, I mean, this is something the KMT and the TPP are going to have to grapple with, which is, are they alienating a large part of the population, and in the TPP's case, it may even be their own supporters, as they try to go about what many perceive to be a deeply unpopular and controversial issue.
The party dynamics in Taiwan's politics is fascinating, and Vincent Chao is right in the thick of it. At the end of our interview, I cannot help but sense that he seemed to be recognizing it as a valuable part of Taiwan's democracy.
I mean, other than to say that I'm grateful for continued international interest in this issue, and certainly Taiwan's a young democracy, and we're going to go through, pains, and we're going to go through clashes, and we're going to go through a lot of difficult rhetoric as we find the right balance. But I do think that all of this, should still be seen as hallmarks of Taiwan's democracy, even the clashes in LY, because it means that people feel strongly about public issues and are willing to put actions behind words. So, I think, again, Taiwan's democracy is robust and strong and continues to deserve international support and participation.
This episode of The Divide is produced by Radio Taiwan International. And a special thanks to Tristan Hildebrand and Chou Ting-en. If you're a TPP or KMT representative who wants to be on the show, please feel free to reach out.